Recently I did a video on what anarcho-capitalism was, and whether I was an ANCAP or not. I ultimately hesitated in calling myself an ANCAP because I had a few questions about it, and the immediate response in the comments clarified many of these issues, and they have since been solidified with a great video by LiquidZulu. For a channel that has less than 3,000 subscribers, the quality of his video is fantastic, so I actually do think you guys should give it a watch, and I'll leave links in the description. I did say that I haven't had enough time to read the literature on anarcho-capitalism, and so while I'm happy with the free market side of things, I just don't know enough about the anarcho side of it. And LiquidZulu acknowledges this. He actually says that one of the common issues that the ANCAPs face is that people don't have the time to read all the literature. To quote a comment from my own video, "I love your topics and that you explain your concepts to a general audience. It's also helpful to keep in mind that after working all day, most people can't listen to anything past 30 minutes. Everyone is tired and have children to deal with. Bite-sized topics are perfect. You are filling that niche and doing a great job educating people in Economy 101. This comment highlights the point perfectly because most people are not in a position to read about this stuff, or even care. My videos on economics don't get as many views as the military or ideological videos, and the poll I did a while back shows this. Most people are not interested in economics, mainly because they've never been exposed to it, and assume things about it that aren't true. So, while I am reading this stuff in the background on occasion, even I have to prioritize other things. However, I have read enough to fully understand LiquidZulu's video, from the Robinson Crusoe analogies to the part where he even showed a clip of a guy teaching dialectics and things like that. I actually understood all of that, but my audience may not do, so like my comments have just explained, I'm going to attempt to summarise LiquidZulu's points and put them in as simple as a way as possible, which I know has its dangers, but again, everyone can watch his video for the full explanation. In my previous video, I stated that Murray Rothbard in Ethics of Liberty said that man is a rational actor, and then said that men aren't always rational and that irrationality causes problems. As LiquidZulu and other commenters pointed out, I was using a more broad definition of rational than what Rothbard meant. By rational, Rothbard meant purposeful, which then begs the question of why he didn't just use the word purposeful. So the idea is that men engage in purposeful behaviour. You know, if he wants to fish or if he wants to punch someone, then that's purposeful behaviour and therefore rational. Well, I got muddled with that, and you guys in Zulu have clarified that for me, which is fantastic. My concern is that the dictionary definition of the word rational is not purposeful. And it doesn't matter which dictionary you use, basically none of them list purposeful as rational. And this is important because, as I learned after I released my video, ANCAPs are using different definitions than everyone else. And this is going to become important, as you're about to see, because, contrary to my and many of my audience's expectations, in ANCAPistan, there might actually be states. Yes. But they just wouldn't be classed as states by the ANCAPs. I pinned a comment by Carol who explained, is there a market for a state? No, because state is by definition coercive. If taxes are optional, so you can choose not to pay and use alternative services, it ceases to be a state. In the words of Murray Rothbard, the state is that organisation in society which attempts to maintain a monopoly of the use of force and violence in a given territorial area. In particular, it is the only organisation in society that obtains its revenue not by voluntary contribution or payment for services rendered, but by coercion. And he's quoting from Murray Rothbard's Anatomy of the State. This is actually the first time I've ever heard this argument, and upon doing my video I realised that the ANCAPs are using a distinct definition of what a state is, and that definition includes the idea that the state is coercive. So it enforces its rules and taxation on us via its state police and military forces. I had read some of their literature, but this was the first time I've seen this distinction being made of what a state is. And I wasn't expecting this at all, so in a bit of shock I actually asked this in the comments of Zulu's video. Thank you for responding. In conjunction with the other comments in my video, this was a bit of a revelation for me. I'm glad I made my video now. But can I just clarify something? I know ANCAPs didn't like it when I said a voluntary state, because a state cannot be voluntary by definition. However, is it true to say that in anarcho-capitalism there would be an entity that's voluntary and non-coercive which fulfills some of the roles that a state does or claims to do? So let's just say for argument's sake that the only entity that can prevent a police service enforcing a tax system on the people is the state. I know that might not be true, but let's just go with it. Then in Anarchistan, a voluntary central entity would exist to prevent that police service from abusing its power. But it wouldn't be classed as a state because it's not coercive. Is this what you mean? I ask this because one of the biggest criticisms I've seen of anarcho-capitalism is that it's utopian and cannot function because there's no state. However, if there is a state, but it's not really a state by definition, just an entity that looks similar but is voluntary and non-coercive, then this annihilates 99% of the criticism of anarcho-capitalism. LiquidZulu did respond saying, "Hello, thank you for your comment and for shouting the video out, it is much appreciated." And just to clarify, I put a community post up on my channel informing people of LiquidZulu's videos, so that's what he's referring to here. But he continues. Per your question, I tend to avoid speaking about anarcho-capitalism as some particular structure of governance, instead speaking of it as a theory about what the law is and what is justified. But with that said, to have a private property society, which you could call an anarcho-capitalist society if we put aside my pedantry, you would indeed require some industry to fight against a taxing police force or any other type of crime. Harper has a good argument as to why the insurance industry is a good candidate for this in his private production of defense. Now, to accept the argument that there would be some central entity that prevents the tax enforcement, which seems to be what the Randians argue for, we would indeed not class this as a state. The reason for this is that such an organisation would be operating by purely voluntary economic means rather than aggressive political means. Again, this is a bit different to what I expected. I keep thinking I've misinterpreted this, but so many people are saying the exact same thing that I don't think I have. So my impression was that there would be no state-like entity at all in anarcho-capitalism. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It looks like there are states, but they operate on a voluntary basis, and because they're non-coercive, they're not classed as states. According to one of my commenters, Fred the French ANCAP, without coercion, it's not called a state, it's called an association. Okay, well, if this is the case, if anarcho-capitalism has state-like entities that operate on a voluntary basis, associations, then this allays 99% of the criticisms of anarcho-capitalism. Most people hesitating in the comments or outright criticising anarcho-capitalism said things like, well, without a state, nobody could enforce private property rights, or build the roads, or stop the criminal gangs from enforcing their will upon you, etc. Well, none of that's true anyway, but assuming that it was, all that goes out the window when you realise that there would be a state-like entity that protects you. The only thing is, it would be entirely voluntary, entirely non-coercive, and so, therefore, it wouldn't be classed as a state. It would be called an association. Thus, if you were headed in the ANCAP direction, but you were turned off by the anarchism part, you can now breathe a sigh of relief because this does fix the problem that you had with it. And if anarcho-capitalism does have these associations, then I'm happy to say that I am in alignment with anarcho-capitalism. I won't call myself an ANCAP for reasons I'll explain later, so I'm still sticking to the free market guy thing for now, or maybe voluntarist, but I am effectively on board. I'd much prefer voluntarist associations than coercive states, and I can imagine such a system working in reality. However, despite this, I am going to have to push back on this definition of a state. So according to Murray Rothbard, the state is coercive by definition, and if it's not coercive, it's not a state. But is this really the case? LiquidZulu has a video titled, "Yes, Socialism is when the government does stuff," and how state capitalism doesn't exist. I agree with him entirely with what he said in that video. However, the argument Zulu made was that the dictionary definitions were the correct ones, which is interesting. I actually have an entire video explaining the definition of socialism and capitalism, my public versus private video, so I can confirm it's not just the dictionary definitions, it's the rest of the historical literature as well. But yes, socialism is when the state controls the economy and society. Socialism is social ownership of the means of production. Or in other words, when the government does stuff. So I am in agreement with Zulu on this point. The problem is that the dictionary definition of what a state is does not mention coercion. The dictionaries vary, but the essential definition is that a state is a politically organised community on a given piece of territory. That definition is backed up by the historical sources. Again, see my public versus private video. And the idea goes like this. When humans gather together, they form hierarchies. These hierarchies, when they reach a certain size, get classed as public, which is when they become states. People argued over this, so I actually did a follow-up video titled "TIK's Definitions Are Wrong" about socialism and capitalism, and I ironed out some of the issues, but essentially when you have a large hierarchy of society, that is classed as a state. And so you can have states within a state, which is a term used to describe some of the corporations like IG Farben, and it also applies to states that haven't got governments. So if the government of Germany collapses into total anarchy, we'd still call it Germany, because Germany is a state even if it hasn't got a government. Rothbard's definition isn't the mainstream definition, and it's not the historical definition either. He has changed the definition, which in theory is fine, but in this instance it leads to problems. The benefit of using the historical definition is that even if we have a tribe in the Amazon rainforest, let's call them the LiquidZulus, and this tribe doesn't have money or taxation, it's just a bunch of people gathered together for protection and to form hunting parties, that tribe would still be classed as a state. When we say the LiquidZulus, we are referring to the tribe itself, and that is a state, regardless of the form of government. Germany is still Germany even if the government of Germany collapses. Why? Because Germany itself is a state. The definition Murray Rothbard gives doesn't factor this in. Under his definition, no tribal state or city-state or nation-state could be called a state unless it has a coercive government. So Anarchy-Capitalism couldn't be called a state, even though if you call it Anarchy-Capitalism, you're actually acknowledging that it is a state, because a bunch of people that gather together in an area form a community or a society, and that society is the state. The people are the public, and the public is the state. So Anarchy-Capitalism is a state even if there's no government. Let me put it this way. If I said that a city is only a city when there's taxation, that's obviously not correct, right? A city is a condensed collection of people and buildings in an area, and it has nothing to do with taxation. And similarly, if I said that a state is only a state when there's taxation, that's not true either. A state is an organised collection of people in a given area. So the state still exists whether taxation happens or not. Now, you might argue that a state has to be politically organised in order for it to be classed as a state, not just organised. But the word politics comes from the word polis, which means city. Politics is the affairs of the city, or in modern terms, it's the affairs of society. And what is this society? It's the people. Politics is the affairs of the people, because the people are the public and the public is the state. The polis is the people together in a given area, a society. And if it's economically organised, that would still result in societal organisation, and therefore would count as political organisation as well. I know you're going to argue against that, but let me put it in a different way. If you economically organize society, you have organized the polis. You have organized the people, the state. Thus, you have politically organized the state economically. Economics is a form of political organization. The socialists have figured this out, and so we should too. Economics is a form of politics because you're organizing society, and it's the society that's the state. It's maybe not the government, but it is the state. And, okay, let's just say we don't call them states, but associations, and they're entirely voluntary. These associations would still be political. Politics emerges from society, and associations would still be classed as states even if they're not coercive. You might think that the definitions are muddled, and you're right. The terms themselves are muddled, and that's not me doing that, that's just how things have been defined over millennia. So again, watch my public versus private video for more information. But the mainstream definition of a state allows us to say, you see that society over there, that tribe, that nation, that city? Well, that is a state. Rothbard's definition doesn't allow us to say that. His is entirely based on whether it's coercive or not. Now, you might say, okay, let's change the definition to reflect this. But hold on, if we're allowed to change the definitions, then surely the socialists are also allowed to change definitions as well. LiquidZulu cannot argue that we should change the definition of a state to reflect Rothbard's view, whilst also arguing that socialists are not allowed to change the definition of socialism to it's not when the government does stuff, it's when puppy dogs and rainbows happen, or whatever they want to change it to. By changing the definition, you're opening the door to a subjectivist, postmodernist insanity. But even if you say we are justified in changing the definition, and the socialists are not, we're not justified. When we come together economically, we form a society. That society is the state. An association, non-coercive, is a society, and society is the state. An association is a state. So coercion is not essential to the formation or maintenance of society, the state. It might be that every government that has ever been used coercion, but an association would still be a government. So Rothbard's definition of coercion, meaning state, doesn't work. It's just not correct. And I have another problem with this redefinition. I'm not someone who thinks that language should stand still, but I do think that the purpose of language is to communicate, not to obfuscate. Words may evolve their meanings over time, but I think Rothbard has created his own definition of what a state is, and that's causing a miscommunication. When he said rational, he meant purposeful, and thus caused a miscommunication. And when he said state, he meant forceful government, which is not the same thing, and thus he has created another miscommunication. And by changing the meaning of the word state, Rothbard was then able to adopt the word anarchy for his ideas, which causes even more confusion. I mean, it's not just me, most people still will not define the state as being coercive because that's not the dictionary definition, and it's just not the definition that people are using. They see the state as the central government or authority, which is why the dictionary definition reflects that and doesn't reflect Rothbard's coercion idea. So this isn't anarchy, it's volunteerism, but it's not anarchy. And I know LiquidZulu said anarchy is no ruler or no authority, but there would still be rulers and authorities. They're called associations, apparently. And as Hopper said, in the absence of a state, insurance companies would step up to defend their clients and thus fund militaries. Maybe we'll call these associations. Well, while they may not technically enforce taxation, those insurance companies would be the authorities. They would be the rulers. They would be the associations, the states. So this isn't anarchy, it's only anarchy under Rothbard's incorrect definition. And I also remain firm in my conviction that the term capitalism is bad. What I didn't mention in the last video, but have explained this before, is that the term capitalism doesn't just mean free market, it's actually an anti-Semitic term.
In his book On the Jewish Question, Karl Marx said, "Money is the jealous god of Israel, besides which no other god may exist."
He then says in Das Kapital that money, the Jewish god, becomes capital, and then says that those that chase capital are the capitalists. In other words, those that chase the Jewish god are the capitalists. He's saying that the capitalists are the Jews. Capitalism, therefore, for Karl Marx, is Judaism. Das Kapital is the Jew, or the Jewish god. That's literally what it means. That's how Karl Marx defined it. So, the term capitalism is actually an anti-Semitic smear for Judaism. Marx hates the bourgeoisie, the people who lived in boroughs, towns, townfolk, because they couldn't own land in Christian Europe. They also practiced usury, the lending of money and charging interest, which was banned by the Christian Pope. So the only people who could be the money changers, as Karl Marx called them, were the Jews. Marx is literally saying that the people whose sole motive is the accumulation of more money, the Jewish god, are the Jews, and he calls them the capitalists or the bourgeoisie, or whatever other word he wants to use, to mask the anti-Semitism. And people fell for it. So, because of anti-Semitism, the ideas of capitalism and Judaism are inseparable. And since I am neither Jewish nor anti-Semitic, I have no reason to adopt the anti-Semitic slur word capitalism. And while LiquidZulu argues that we should embrace the term because the propaganda machine of the left will just make a mockery of whatever new terms we adopt, I disagree strongly in this instance because the term capitalism is inherently anti-Semitic. It comes from old-fashioned anti-Semitism. It was coined by the anti-Semites, the socialists and Marxists as well, and it's remarkable that so many people haven't realised this. I mean, it makes sense because scholars continue to spout the lie that Marx was an economist, even though he wasn't. He was a theologian. And so if they can't even get that right, what hope have they got of recognising the anti-Semitism of socialism? But I do think we need to start recognising this and understand that socialism is an anti-Semitic religion. Plus, despite being around for ages, the concept of the free market doesn't have the stigma that the term capitalism has. It doesn't mean big business or big tech or monopolies or rich people. Free market implies the mom and pop shop owners or the self-employed workers or the child's lemonade stand. When we say private property, we don't mean landed estates, we mean people owning their own houses or workshops. And yes, factories and enterprises can exist under this system, but free markets limit the size of those businesses, keeping them smaller than they would otherwise be under the current system. Capitalism implies big business and rich people, even setting aside the anti-Semitism. Thus, I do think free market or voluntarism are better terms than capitalism and anarcho-capitalism. Also, I have found some success in responding to people who are criticising capitalism by saying, yeah, capitalism sucks, that's why we need to end capitalism and bring in a free market. And this has happened both in my comment section and in real life. I said something similar to one guy in real life and he was completely bewildered. It was like a deer in headlights kind of moment. And if you think about it, this is actually a good tactic. If they say, well, capitalism is the free market, then we don't have capitalism because we don't have a free market. These people believe that we live in a capitalist society right now. So by agreeing with them and saying that the current system is bad, which it is, this causes a glitch in the matrix. It pulls them out of the bubble, out of the wizard circle. They expect you to defend the capitalist system. But no. If the current system is capitalism, well, we don't want this. We want a free market. So don't defend the current system. Tell them, no, I'm on your side. That's why we need a free market. So the terms anarchism and capitalism come packed with a ton of baggage. And the term free market, that has been around for a while, just doesn't have anywhere near the amount of slander the others have. Worse, there are many so-called capitalists out here defending the corporations or universal basic income, etc. I'm certainly not on their side, so while I agree that we shouldn't be ashamed of certain terms, I also think that these particular terms are just not helping. Language should communicate, not obfuscate. The enemies of reason muddy the waters, and I think we need to clear the muck out. The term anarcho-capitalism does not imply that there would be a state-like entity, an association, that will solve the issues that the critics bring up. If they knew this association existed, they probably wouldn't be critics, and I've been reading Mises and so on for a few years now, and I've only just learned that this association thing even exists in the last few weeks. And that's not good. This should be front and centre. This is the biggest criticism of the whole concept. The idea that there is no state. Well, there is. So it's turning people away from what is otherwise a fantastic concept. I'm going to leave the link to LiquidZulu's video below. Thank you very much, sir, and everyone else for clarifying things, plus the book recommendations. And I hope I haven't misinterpreted this, and I look forward to hearing what your response will be to everything. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.